Alpha Draft costs money to play. At least if you want that big Skrilla. You think that Skrilla is not worth more to me? I would trade my chance to swag out when Skrilla is on the line. You play free fantasy with scrubs and you play it well. I'll play Alpha Draft with the big boys. I learned how to die a long time ago. So, Immortals were the team that looked destined. Everything seemed that they were on lock, that they were going to win this split of the NALCS. They went 17-1 in the regular season. They were a team who obviously had done fantastically against every team in the league. And yet, when they got to the playoffs, they were smashed. They were clean swept. It wasn't even that competitive, actually, ultimately. And by who? The number 6 seed, the lowest seed in the playoffs, a TSM team which had looked very disorganized coming into the playoffs. Now, before we address Immortals and the personnel and all the issues they had over the season, well, yeah, you have to say, first and foremost, there is a caveat to that, which is that Riot did shift the meta in a reasonably drastic manner to make it so that you see all these tanks top, and even the ones that aren't pure tanks like Echo, okay, it's kind of fuckery in terms of how strong the champion is there, but otherwise it's going back to tanks. It's not the pure carry top laners anymore. Unless you're fantastic and you can brute force a Rise or something like that, which we're going to see in the future, as the Koreans have showed us. So sure, when you do that and you take away the strength of one of their best players, like I thought Huni was the best player in Immortals, yeah, it's going to affect how good they are, but at the same time, they shouldn't absolutely collapse like this. They shouldn't get absolutely smashed by what was the number 6 seed in this particular way. So while that is relevant, certainly, and it's a League of Legends problem, and a MOBA problem, and an arts problem, League of Legends, Dota, and all those games, not as much in games like CSGO, it is something that, for me, while that is an issue, Immortals' other problems were exacerbated by that meta shift. So the meta shift alone wouldn't have killed them, but they already had all these other little flaws and idiosyncrasies and little deficiencies and little areas where they weren't developed, that when this then came along, the meta shift, they were just utterly blown up because that just emphasized them even more, those issues. Now, what's interesting is, I saw as usual, people were trying to track the narrative of Immortals and how fantastic they were, and they were winning all these games, and they could win seemingly doing anything. And yet I saw all these articles about Immortals, and even some of them trying to put them in the scope of like, wow, are they one of the best teams of all time? Look how incredible this is in the West. But what people failed to do, and this is something I really don't like, is if you're going to track narrative and you're going to put people in a historical context, give the context of what the level of competition they're playing against is, who they're battling to get these amazing records. Because one of the things we always say, think when people talk back to that first ever C9, Cloud9, in summer of 2013, we don't go back and go, oh, there were such monsters. We go, there were monsters in NA, and you can look back then and see how certain teams weren't developed enough and had massive problems here and there, and some of the rosters were much weaker. And so we put that context in. We still say they're amazing to have gone 25-3, that's fucking unbelievable, and then go 13-3 overall for the playoffs, but we put in that context. We don't just leave it out there and then make it sound to somebody who's just come into League of Legends like, yeah, SK Telecom going 15-0 and winning OGN Champions Winter 2013, the hardest league in the world, against some of the best teams in the world. Yeah, that's just quite similar to actually Cloud9, a few months earlier going 25-3 and 13-3 and winning NALCS. No one would do that. You put that context in because that's being reasonable, that's being fair. And it's going to help you understand better how good the team was and what the sort of ambience and the atmosphere of where they played was. Yeah, all these articles I saw about Immortals, what tilted me is that people never seemed to bring up just how weak NALCS was for most of the split. Like, let's be real, like 80% of the other teams in the league were fucking bad for most of the split. I mean, okay, so CLG and C9, even right up to the end of the split, were the only teams that looked legit, that looked like they had something going for them, they had some polish, they were well-rounded in any sort of sense, they could actually compete with all the other teams. Once you got out of that top 3, which Immortals is part of, the other fucking 7 teams were massively flawed. Some of them really quite bad, even if they were fairly high up in the league. The rest of the league fucking sucked in many, many different ways, in all the ways you could imagine, but like, I've got one, you've got another, he's got another way of sucking. Like, it was unbelievable, the diversity of terrible play in the fucking NLCS this split, while they were dominating. So yes, they were dominating, congrats for taking advantage of that, but they weren't doing it as like monsters who were making few mistakes and would just figured something out. But other people's bad play helped them out in that sense. Then you have to consider, even for C9 and CLG to fully emerge, okay, early on they were looking like, are we sure these teams are going to stay around here? Eventually, yeah, they solidified themselves, so those were legit. But then you look, so Team Liquid and TSM now look really sick, right? Team Liquid didn't develop until like the second half of the split. TSM didn't develop even by the end of the fucking split. If anything, the the second half of the split for them was really poor. The number of games they lost, and they really leveled off and looked like they were in terrible shape. A lot of the games they won in the first part of the split looked like very fluky, or they looked because they played other teams that had problems like Team Liquid, who just fucking gave them games, etc., and Renegades, etc. Then you consider NRG, who always should have been a good team on paper, never really were. Like, even some of the early games, they were like, oh, this is all right, but, oh, now they're dropping off, now they're dropping off more, oh, now they're shit at the end of the split. Then you consider who else was even had anything to show in the split. I mean, I guess at certain points in time, Echo Fox, when they got Froggen back, but they had all the sub games that had ruined the season for them. Then they themselves turned out not to be that mega. They were a decent team. Renegades obviously had a good end to the split, but that was after they changed a whole bunch of players. It wasn't the same team. So you look back at it, and this was a very weak split. This was a really disjointed, underdeveloped, just bad split all in all, in terms of competitive play and how many good teams there were, and how many even like mid-tier teams that could compete there were. So as a result, Immortals got gifted a lot of wins, even though otherwise they were able to take a lot. Like, I think if this split had more solid teams, or the teams had been anywhere close to where they were by the end of the split, I think Immortals would have still been number one, but I think they would have had something like 14-4. I think that seems like a reasonable one, or 13-5. I think that's like more in the realm of what they would have had, and they would have still been number one or number two or whatever, but I think that would have been more within a reasonable wheelhouse for where they were and where they were going to be. When Fnatic went 18-0, yeah, at the time everyone was trying to shit on the league. But if you remember, that was actually a strong split, that summer split. Because what happened was, you had Origin and H2K were legit teams in different respects. Origin had the veterans, and they could just get it together in the game. They could piece together a game out of nowhere, and somehow they would win these games. Then you had H2K, had like solid players, not stars in many senses, but they had solid players who understood how to play a macro style and were well coached. And so they were able to win with the macro style. Those two teams were up there, like the CLG and C9. But beyond that, you had this really solid cadre of teams below them. You had your Gambits, your Rockhats, your Unicorns of Love. These teams were decent enough actually around that middle there, and actually were able to compete in a reasonable manner. They weren't just shit shows all those games. So that was a pretty solid and legit split to win overall. Well, where the fuck was the Origin and H2K in this NALCS split? Yeah, C9 and CLG eventually became it, but they weren't there from the very beginning of the split. They weren't so obviously well-rounded and stuff as these teams were in this sense. And definitely once you get past them, there's nothing going on there. There's no scenario where there's the Gambit and the Rockat and NLCS. These teams, NRG, TSM until the end of the split, these teams look fucking terrible. So let's look at the personnel of the guys on Immortals. And the notion that people never thought there was ever going to be problems here just seems very naive to me. So let's start off with the person who I think is one of the most contentious players in the team. It's not going to be Wild Turtle, which is, I think it's Adrian, the support player. Because this is a guy who was spamming the fuck out of Janna and Soraka. And they were winning games, and it was working, and Wild Turtle was doing really well. But were people really naive enough to think he was just going to be able to do this forever? That he could spam Janna and Soraka, and he would win NALCS. Then he could spam Janna and Soraka, go to MSI. Then maybe one day he could win Worlds off it. I mean, I assume most people weren't. They probably thought, oh, he can do it now, and then he'll pick up all these other champions who are really good at it. You can never make that assumption. Until someone shows you they've got the super sick wide champion pool, until someone shows you they can play other styles of champion, so that when you have to change up your comp, or the meta changes, that you can do so. Until they show you, why would you believe it? Wait for them to show you. Say, oh, it'd be interesting if they could. I think he has a skill. Maybe he could. Don't assume it, though. Making those assumptions, it's not only flawed, but I notice people make the assumption, and then they take it as a fact in their mind, and then they build other assumptions off that. And that's how we get into this world where Immortals were ridiculously blown out of proportion for all these facts I'm saying, where people didn't put the context in and consider what would happen when things changed. Now, obviously, one of the problems with Adrian spamming Janna and Soraka is, where was everyone else in the world doing this? Now, did you really imagine that he just cracked some secret meta that Koreans were even looking at and going, still can't figure out what he's doing, so we're not going to play those champions? Oh, yeah, there are times when Korea or China will play different champions, or they won't pick up a certain champion, or a champion's strong there and isn't used in the West as much. But this is such a drastic example for how early in the split it was when he was playing these champions, that it was more reasonable to suggest somehow this is working in NALCS, probably wouldn't work elsewhere. They've probably even tried it elsewhere, and it wasn't as effective, so they've stuck with other options instead. That's why they're spamming Alistair all the time, and whatever else it may be. Morgana, whatever it might be. So I think it was naive to think that they'd masterminded some new meta approach from the support position that was going to work this well. Now, it did work, but the question, again, to what extent? Now, the big problem I see with Adrian as a player is I didn't mind when he was on tip and he was like almost cut when people were like, oh, he's underrated. Sure, he was in that context. He was a good support, above average certainly, and for Tip, he obviously should have been their support. He's playing pretty well, and it's not like they had the chance to get Yellow Star or fucking Kasing or something. They were going to get players who weren't as good as him. So in that scenario, he was underrated, he was undervalued. The problem is now, he is now, and all split long, has been overhyped, overvalued, on the basis that since so many people remember him being underrated and undervalued, they think, oh, he was underrated. Right, actually, he's amazing. And they've gone too far the other way. And they've gone way beyond it. And they've made a player who's good, but not great, into some like, oh, he's the best support in the whole region, by far, obviously. No, at no point in time did I look at Adrian and go, this guy's better than fucking Afro. Are you out of your mind? No, there's not even vaguely in almost any metric could you say so, except for at playing Soraka. Okay, brilliant, wicked. No one else is doing that, mate. I feel like in this scenario, what happened was you got into what is actually a not like common, but occasional trap of people who are analysts and who are trying to be experts and who are trying to study the game, which is they want to be that guy where every now and then you will find someone who's a sick player, who's a bit underrated, who seems like they're showing some potential, and that's not just like some mirage. It's actually going to develop. Like, for example, early in the split, when we were doing our Summon Insight episodes and By the Numbers episodes, me and Monty, I actually noticed early on with some of their early wins, like, wow, this Jeanette team's actually a lot better than they should be. Like, on paper, sure, I get it, they shouldn't be really good, but they look like they could really be like a top, like a top 4 team, like a top 3 team. And at the time, people were like, yeah, I don't know, like maybe some of those wins weren't as legit, teams like Samsung, these other teams are coming up, they're in position there. And what do you find out? They've been fantastic. So when you find that, it's really cool. And obviously it's a great feeling, like, oh, I think I've keyed into something there. And the better they do, you feel like, oh, I'm more justified. What I'm saying was correct. Maybe there's something to this. The problem is when people fall into that trap, that feeling is so addictive, or it's so satisfying, that it feels like they want to find it anywhere they can. And sometimes they'll look and their brain will convince them they found it in an area where they haven't, or they're going too far to say that they have. And so they want to be that guy who found that guy where secretly he is really good, but the whole world doesn't know yet. And they're the first to say it, and then they're the first to continue it, and then they keep reminding people that I said it, and then they're watching, they're waiting, and then eventually when he becomes super amazing and he is the best, they can be like, see, I wrote this article years ago. And the problem is, as a result, they take liberties. And what they do is, if they're being honest with themselves, they'll know what I mean here. People who are challenger scene experts and who are experts on Twitter and make lots of, some of them make very good comments and have a good knowledge of the game. What they do essentially, the analogy would be, is they take 10 darts and they throw the 10 darts at the dartboard. And what they do is, as long as one hits near the target, they just forget all the ones that missed. And they go, see, I told you, I knew that guy would make it. And what they don't realize is, all the ones that didn't make it, if somehow the one that made it makes you an expert and makes you a knowledgeable, then surely there's some sort of implication on the ones that didn't make it. But no, what they do is forget all that. They don't reference that again. And so it looks like they're just nailing it. Oh, he's nailing it again and again. And people forget about the other ones. So to me, that's what people did with Adrian here. I also think that if you look at Adrian, I think there's a really good analogue out there for him in League of Legends, because this happened last year. You remember a guy called Bonnie Fufu with Gravity, who was the #1 team for a while, and he looked like he was one of the main reasons why, and his play on a couple of champions was really good. Obviously, particularly Thresh, looked really awesome and like, oh, this is great. And then what would he see? When he went off that champion, yeah, not as much. There was only really like Shen for a while. There was only really the Thresh. Of the other champions, just a good support, above average at times, sure. Not great though, not a god. And more so, in his sense, I can at least understand the hype because he was a flashy player. In Adrian's sense, I can understand it as well because he's a solid player. He looks like he's a team player, he's a smart player. But neither of them have the complete package. Neither of them are monsters. Neither of them are some gorilla type guy where, yeah, they could play one champion all the time because they're gods on it, but you get them off that champion. And the reason why you find out that people will let them play that champion is because you get someone like Gorilla off that champion. He just goes over to other champions and kicks a shit out of you still. And it's like, oh, by the way, I have like 10 champions in my pool. That's not what was going on here. So both of these people, now people understand that Bunny Fufu wasn't a god and that he needs the right team for him and the right circumstances and the right champions. But people, they might now have started to grasp on with Adrian, but they went way too far over the split. Then we'll go to who I think was the star of the team. This is why I was shocked this guy didn't win the MVP, was Huni. Now, Huni, when things work out, is very good. His style of play and what he wants to do, and when he's allowed to do that, and when his team facilitates him doing that, he is fucking very good. He will smash people. Problem with Huni, though, is he has always been stubborn with his picks. And by the way, I don't think he trolls. Like, I think in the regular season he might experiment, He might think that something's going to work. I don't think he ever picks it as a joke, though. Like, haha, I can pick this, even though this shouldn't work and it's bad and it will work anyway. I don't think he does that. I think that's actually like a very naive, almost childish way that people interpret the league. I don't think that's going on at all. I don't think his team and his coaches will allow that. I think he legitimately thinks he can make all these things work. So sometimes he's overestimating his own skill level or the differential between him and the opponent, or whether this can work in the meta of an actual competitive game, not solo queue. Sure, that might be the case. He might be a bit delusional in that sense, or a bit overly enthusiastic, or a little bit too eager to try and force something to work. But I think he thinks all these picks can work. The thing with Huni is he's very stubborn about what he thinks can happen, and I think he sometimes comes into games with like one set way that this is going to work, and if that works, he's going to look amazing, and if it isn't, then it's going to fuck the whole game up for the team. And so for me, he forces it too much. He forces trying to be like this super hard carry and snowball it and wreck the whole game, where actually someone like Kabashard, I'll give him credit, when he does carry all those games, was an amazing top laner, he doesn't force it quite as much. It still does. The team is going to be best on him, and he is still going to be the carry, but he's not just going to brute force it as much and completely throw the game. He's still going to look for opportunities. He's going to create opportunities. He's not just going to decide there are opportunities no matter what and then make it happen. To me, the way Huni forces it is almost like solo queue-ish. It's like he's that guy who just has to snowball within the first 10 to 15 minutes. Like, I'm going to do this no matter what. And if he doesn't, what happens with the guys that are like that? They get behind in a kill, or they go for a play and they burn a summoner and they get ganked. This is exactly the sort of world you see that Huni's in, where as long as it's working, oh, it's great. I mean, when I see this guy trying to snowball this much, it's like, if I could take him back in a time machine, this guy, he'd be loving it in Season 2. He'd be living the fucking dream, just wrecking fools all over the place. But that's not the world we live in anymore. So the problem for me with Huni is once he hits that limit where he's playing someone who's got a good approach to him, or they've got a good matchup, and a matchup hasn't worked out the way he thinks it is, or he's gotten behind on a kill, or he hasn't got as many kills as he wants, and he wants to force it more. His like brutal, brute force, stubborn style of play means that actually he can snowball the game the other way. He can snowball it for the opponent and the opposing team and feed them and get them in situations that are really good for them and overextend. And because he's drawing so many resources from Reignover can't be elsewhere on the map. He can't be giving those resources to the rest of his team, even if the resource is just time and ganks. So as a result, yeah, you put Huni in this scenario, and the most obvious example of this was always international play, because you put him in international play and he never could be as dominant, and actually suddenly he just became a good player, and somebody could certainly compete, but then if he was against the other monster carries, a Smeb type character, they'd kick the shit out of him, and that's what would happen. And here's the thing, he'd let it happen. He'd facilitate them kicking the shit out of him, because when they start to kick the shit out of him, they're having great matchups. He wouldn't just go, well, better play a bit more conservatively, or I better get the rest of my team to put me in a special. No, he'd even pick his stubborn picks against monsters that I get his head smashed in. So for me, Huni's an amazing player, and in the West, he's certainly one of the absolute best and one of the best impact players. But he's got this very obvious flaw and limit. And his teams seem to be totally ignorant of that and just act as though, it doesn't matter. And somehow, all this coaching and development doesn't seem to be kicking in with him. He doesn't seem to get it. Which, okay, he's a young guy. But if you're going to give all these coaches credit, you've got to also pull him up. Like, what are you doing in this sense? Why isn't this star developed? Why isn't he learning to have some awareness about his teammates and the cost of what he's doing in the game when it doesn't work out, and how that's actually selfish at times? Yeah, it's great when it carries the game, but you got to know when it isn't. Or you got to know when, if you're a basketball player, you're not hot, you're not open, they're playing you well, and you're still just forcing bad shots with two defenders in your face when your teammate's open, and maybe he would make the shot more than you. You can't have ego in that sense. So you go past Huni, who's had these problems in the past, but we just saw them again. Obviously, admittedly, his position got hit hard by the meta. And then you go to the mid lane. So Pobelter, I've always said this, and I've just never seen reason for it to change. The thing about Pobelter is he's never been bad. He's also never been very good. He's been average on an NLCS level. He is a mid-tier mid. If he's in a bad team, he'll find a way to do well and do decently and still look pretty decent. You go, he's better than this team. But then when he's in a really good team, you'll go, actually, he's not quite at the level of his team. No, he's good, but he's not some sick player. He's not some star player. He's a mid-tier mid. And that doesn't matter what happens. But as a result, he's not much of a carry threat. And by the way, anyone who goes, wait a minute, if you get one to Victor in summer season, yeah, people who have one or two champions they can carry on are not carry threats. Because the whole point is, you can just ban them out and then they can't fucking carry the game, can they? Real people who are the main carry threats in teams have to be able to have such a deep champion pool and such a sick way of playing that they can withstand sometimes 2 bans and still carry the fucking game. This is for real. So yeah, I don't know why anyone expected it from Pobelter. He was fine. There's no problem with him, but this is what we can't expect. The problem with him is, what's good about him is he knows he plays like he's not a carry threat. He just props up the mid lane and just makes it just safe essentially and plays even. Great, that's ideal. But as a result, our carry threat is going to be AD carry down here, top laner appears. So when the top lane is fucked up and having problems, what's the one guy left? AD carry. So it's the old Wild Turtle, the controversial Wild Turtle. The reason he's controversial is because he is a good AD carry. He has always been a good AD carry at differing times, depending on what support's in the meta, depending on how his team plays around him. He can be pretty effective. He can carry games, certainly, but he also has massive flaws, and that's why so many experts criticize him and don't hold him in awe as this, he's the best AD carry and he's a monster AD carry, and if you put him against the Asians, he'd be absolutely fantastic. The reason why people don't fall into that trap, experts at least, of presenting him as if he was an Uzi or a Deft or some other player who can mega carry the whole game and do it consistently, it's because he can't. Let me give you an example. Okay, what I'll do is I'll take Wild Turtle, I'll take Uzi, and I'll take Double Lift. And I'll explain to you how, even though they all look to carry mega games and they all do amazingly and get these sick like pentakills and stuff in team fights, the key difference between them, which will illustrate some of the flaws of Wild Turtle, I hope, is like this. So Uzi, yes, can be very bullish and can be very stubborn and can want the picks that he wants and can be trying to be very lane dominant no matter what. And all these things can cost him, and in skirmishes he can overextend and try to just outplay someone. All this is true, but get him to a team fight, and this guy's positioning is fucking immaculate. His understanding of threat while dealing maximum damage is incredible. Then you consider Double Lift, okay. So Double Lift's had a lot of problems at times in his career in team fights, and his positioning can be questionable. But the difference is, I think it's more in his case that he's not actually being greedy. Sometimes he doesn't always calculate properly what's going to happen from the opponent, and that can put him in a bad situation. And sometimes he's not, here's the thing, he's not as bad as he used to be in Season 3 and Season 4. We used to put him on the terrible situation. He just plays well, and he sometimes can't always calculate what, by the way, very few people in the world can. This incredible, intuitive path of where to count and where to go and where to like just dodge enough of the danger while putting the maximum damage out, like a godlike player like Uzi when they're on form or they're deft in a team fight can do so. Now, the difference between them two and Wild Turtle is with Wild Turtles, it almost feels like he isn't even calculating. He isn't even trying to figure these things out. It feels like he just never found a gamble that he didn't like the look of. He just sees an opportunity where it's like, there's something, if everything went perfect here, could work and I could get kills and I could win the game, and he just goes for it. And he doesn't consider, wait a minute, what's my responsibility with this gold I'm carrying? What, with the advantage my team's putting to me with resources, with the edge that we have in the game, do I even need to do this? No, he just thinks, if I do this, then I'll win, and we win the game. And that's what it always felt like with Wild Turtle. And so he goes balls deep again and again and again. And the team has to work around it to bail him out. Otherwise, he's either going to kill everyone with an amazing play, or he's going to die. And on a domestic level, that might work, but you move it up, what do you think is going to happen? So sure, against lesser opponents or less coordinated opponents, he can get away with it. But that's such a flawed approach. And more so than ever, because it requires you to put yourself into positions where essentially your back is against the wall once you've gone in. I mean, famously, he uses escapes to go into the fight. When you do that, you can only kill everyone and win the game and do great, or you will be killed yourself. And you will give up the threat of your team, and now your team's in big trouble, and the fight can be turned on you, or even worse, you can just be picked off, and then the other team might back off again. It's irresponsible with your gold, it's irresponsible with your advantages, and also, it works now, again, because of a gimmick, because he was using these defensive items, he was using the Maw of Malmortius. What happens if those items get nerfed in a month or two? Where's his game then? Where is this style going to be effective from then? What's going to make it work at that point in time, when suddenly there is no Jan and Soraka, and there is no Maw of Malmortius, and Huni has to be on a tank? Where the fuck do you go from then? How's Wild Turtle going to carry you games at that point in time? Then let's go over to Rainover. Now, Rainover is actually the only player in the team I don't really have much criticism for. I think he's a pretty solid player. He's impressed me that he did get over all those problems he had in career. He's been a smart player. He's been a shrewd player. He seems to understand what his carries need. He does his best. My only problem with Rainover is the public's perception of Rainover, where when his teams are winning, again, people make him like the undisputed best jungler who no one can stand against, and he's just a master, and he understands everything about the map. He's the maestro. They talk about him like he was fucking Season 4 Dandy or something. Like he's just some god of map awareness who just reads the whole game and he's 10 steps ahead of everyone else. That's a bit unreasonable. He certainly has one of the best map awarenesses overall, but then you look at stuff like warding, working with the support, it's not really as sick as these sorts of players that you'd be putting him in the category of if you hype him up in this particular sense. Now, when it came to the playoffs, yeah, Huni had to, I actually think, by the way, they went the right route in terms of Huni had to try to do carries. That's fair enough, because again, like I say, you look at the win conditions of the team and the setup of the team, it would be stupid not to have this guy be in a position to carry the game, because first of all, he's going to do it anyway. He's going to try to. And also, he is your biggest carry threat overall for most of the game. At least a reliable one, because Wild Turtle's going to take so many chances. Then there's the fact that when Hooney's gone, as I say, Paul Butler wasn't going to carry the game, so it's all on Wild Turtle, and that's obviously not a great success, not a great plan to win a best of 5 series where you have to win 3 out of the fucking 5 games. You have to win out in most of those scenarios that you're going to put himself in. He doesn't take the good gambles to make that work. Now, in terms of coaching, I do have a few questions here, because that Dylan guy, who was formerly an analyst of TSM, who's the coach, does seem like a guy, well, when I've listened to him talk, seems like he's quite intelligent, seems like he has an interesting way of processing the game and breaking it down and modelling the game and knowing what teams can do. But I have some questions which go like this. Does the team actually listen? When they had all those weird games where they make terrible plays and stupid decisions and seem to play very arrogantly or very frivolently and give up leads and then have to battle back and win them again, is that they just don't listen, that they don't remain disciplined? Did they overrule things he said about picks or what he wanted them to do in the game or the way they were going to play? Also, how does he explain the fact that they were so gimmicky in a bunch of different positions and a bunch of different ways of playing the game, and that as soon as those gimmicks didn't work, they fell flat and had nothing in reserve? How do you explain that if you're the coach? These are questions that have to be asked of you. So ultimately, the Immortals questions go like this. Was Adrian really just going to get Janna and Soraka and just fucking heal his way, shield his way to a world championship? Is that really the plan, was it? Was Pobelter going to carry when Hooney couldn't do so and just be like a world-class mid? Was this really a question? Was Hooney going to wreck everyone, no matter who they were, no matter even if it was fucking Trace or Smeb or Someday or whoever else, a Duke? Was he really just going to body every single top laner in the world and this would never be an issue for you? Was Wild Turtle's style of going so balls deep and so aggressive, was that going to work when the defensive items got nerfed, when his support couldn't play the same champions, when his team couldn't play around him, when he's the only threat and if he dies, the team fights over? Was that really going to work, was it? There's all these questions, and the biggest problem is, it's one thing that us in the public, or us in the sphere of content creators and people trying to be experts and analysts, that we couldn't necessarily divine all these things, but it seems like the team themselves didn't even ever address any of these questions. They just thought blissfully like, I'm sure it'll all just work out forever, all these tenuous conditions upon which our success is based. You look at the great teams of all time, and there is a fundamental aspect to their play that will work outside of metas. Now, they might not be the best anymore, but they'll still be very good. And you can see where the strengths in the team lie, and the strengths aren't gimmicky, and they're not just based on one champion. That's one of the problems this Immortal team had. Now, I hope going to the next split, they can fix some of these issues, or they can address some of them, and they can become a more fundamentally sound team in that respect. But right now, there are a lot of questions and not a whole lot of answers.